from Chicago, it's Startup Hypeman, the podcast. What's up, everyone? My name is Raj Nation, founder and chief pitch artist at Startup Hypeman, where we help startups, scale-ups, and grown-ups not suck at how they pitch themselves so they stand out to their audience and stand apart from the competition. This podcast is all about bringing you the hearts, the minds, and the stories of leaders in the startup ecosystem, talking through the strategies they have deployed in order to build and grow their companies. And it's officially season 17 of the show, and all season long we've got a special treat for you, bringing you guests exclusively from the Startup Hypeman client portfolio, giving you a piece of their journey. Before we begin, if you're not a subscriber yet, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And remember, you can catch all the episodes from our 17 season archive and learn how to pitch your startup at startuphypeman.com. All right, get your popcorn ready and get hyped because it's go time. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone from Orlando, Florida, and currently residing in San Francisco, California. He is the COO of New Age Meats. Please welcome Derin Alemli.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you. Haven't been introduced like that since my highly mediocre high school wrestling career. So that was great.
Well, now you've got something new for not only boardroom meetings, but how about this? When you go through like the In-N-Out drive-through, you can just play that when you pull up. How does that sound?
I love it.
He'll be like, I get that, but I asked for your order, not your name. All right. He is Derin Alemli, COO of New Age Meats. All this season on Startup Hypeman, the podcast, we are talking to clients from the client portfolio of Startup Hypeman. We had the honor of working with New Age Meats a little while back on their investor pitch and helping them with their Series A raise. And they were able to they've been able to do a lot over the last few years. First, they raised a $5 million seed. Then they went out and raised a $20 million Series A. And the future is pretty bright for this company. And here's the thing. They've done it all without any revenue so far. Why? Well, because if you learn a little bit more about New Age Meats, which we will today, you'll find out this is a company that involves a lot of research and development to be able to get to market because they are an alternative meats company, being able to provide the taste, the texture, the smell that you love when you eat meat with none of the harm. That's right. They're able to combine animal cells without actually harming the animal with plant proteins and plant products to create alternative guilt-free meat. And we are here today to talk about their journey to this point, specifically landing investors without any revenue. Now, Derin, why is this on your mind? Why is this important to you?
Well, my previous startup career was definitely predicated on getting companies to revenue as quickly as possible. But there's so many ideas out there that the world really needs right now for the impact that we need for our planet to continue to survive, that are going to take a long time and a lot of capital before they actually get to revenue and are able to make that impact. So I'm just hoping they're out there looking to do just that.
Right on. We're going to learn all about the New Age Meats journey and how you've been able to successfully raise capital without having generated that revenue yet. Before we get there, let's learn a little bit more about you, the person. I want to know, you said we said in your introduction that you are from Orlando, Florida originally. I want to know, what do you feel about where you grew up? How do you feel that's impacted who you are today as a person?
It's a great question. And I think it's been hugely impactful to how I view the world. Orlando is probably even kind of an exaggeration of where I grew up. I actually grew up in a town called Apopka, Florida, which most people have not heard of outside of football recruiting. And, definitely saw some things that as I kind of advanced my career, moved into much bigger cities and certainly, changed sort of, higher grade schooling and all that other people just don't see. And I feel like there's an empathy that comes from that I really otherwise don't encounter a lot of folks that kind of end up in the same place.
I think empathy is so key for so many aspects of an entrepreneurial journey. Product development, you need empathy for the customer. Messaging, you definitely need empathy for the end customer. So you talk about how growing up there is what helped develop an empathy muscle that you can now flex. As you've kind of progressed, what I'm curious to learn, so a little bit of backstory for everyone. There was a point where you actually, you founded a different type of restaurant concept called Square Roots Kitchen. And I remember when you and I first talked, this was a couple of years ago, you were already with New Age Meats. And I was like, that's crazy. I literally lived 1 block away from the Square Roots Kitchen. And that was your company. Now, taking that empathy piece in mind, the concept of that restaurant was actually, let's remove front-facing human interaction. Let's have customers come in, order off of a screen, and then they're just kind of like going to open a drawer essentially when the food is ready, and it'll be there for them. So very like automated restaurant technology. How do you feel empathy can or does it not need to play a role as processes become automated?
Oh, absolutely. I think it does. I mean, certainly from a customer experience standpoint, which is what we're talking about here, you do need to always put yourself in that customer's shoes and understand what do they want and how do you satisfy those needs. But I think in a business like that, it was also quite labor intensive. It was just we could use a little bit less of that. That being said, I found it extremely important to pay above market rates and be sure to incentivize those workers that this is a good place to work. There is advancements for you, assuming the company grows. And certainly I was already entertaining ideas for long-term equity for some of those employees, but obviously didn't end up continuing. So that never became an option. But I think taking care of your employees in any business is vital. Yeah.
Well, and that company lasted several years. You had a handful of locations. You did raise money for that. And then ultimately, I think, it didn't play out the way you had initially hoped. I would like to know, though, in ultimately shutting down Square Roots Kitchen, what do you feel you learned about yourself in just the journey of that company?
I mean, super great question. You get pretty introspective shutting down a business for sure. What really stuck with me was, the people that worked for me were extremely important to me. And that was probably the saddest part was they had a career and I knew I would bounce back, but I didn't necessarily know, how all of them would fare. Fortunately, I was able to place quite a few of them with other roles. But that was definitely a period of a lot of deep looks inside for sure.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is I'm hearing even in that the empathy piece came out because you were immediately looking out for anyone, everyone who was working for you and working with you. You immediately were looking out for their well-being.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they were there every day, working 40 hours a week, if not more often, and we wouldn't have gotten nearly as far without them.
So then you've been with New Age Meats now for almost 2.5 years or so. How did this opportunity come about? The founder, Brian, has been running, he started the company. How did you know him and what was that conversation like to join the company?
Yeah, closing SRK, Square Roots Kitchen, I really knew that I saw that end consumer demand for alternative proteins every single day. It was a new person coming in and asking us, what are we serving in that variety? Can I substitute out some meat? So with that knowledge of the restaurant universe and supply chains and how to get products into that market, I was extremely desirous to join a company in that space. Obviously at the time, even, that was the end of 2019, there were already established players in Impossible and Beyond and others. And I sort of knew my place in the ecosystem is being an early business hire and, wasn't really interested in starting from scratch at that point. So I did a pretty large survey of the industry and talked to a lot of companies. But what really actually sold me was the founder. Brian Spears founded the company in 2018. And what really appealed to me with him is that he had a great vision. He could see where it was going. But on top of that, he was an engineer and not a scientist. So when I talked about the things that we need to execute on to get us to those next stages of investment and then eventually to market and then eventually making that giant impact that we're trying to make, he got it from day one and still, obviously still does. And I do think there's some challenges with some of the other companies that you do need to find that way to really make product and make it at scale. And that's a hard thing to do for a lot of people.
Can you share a little bit more about the vision? You talk about, Brian had a vision and that's what you were sold on. Can you share a little bit more about what that vision was and how did you feel even like hearing that?
I mean, he's an inspiring guy. There's no way around it. So, was definitely feeling energized and still am really. I think the thing that appeals to me most about that vision then, and certainly it's evolved quite a bit, is just, understanding the diversity of things you can do if you get the science right. It's not just about one product or one animal type or anything like that. If you do it right over time, you can really alter the way the food landscape is consumed and really make a huge dent on some of our problems of resource allocation and climate change. And that's what really appealed to me.
Right. So let's kind of unpack this a little bit more as we get into the featured topic for this conversation, which is being able to raise money and land investors when you don't yet have revenue. Generally speaking, so you take that, what you just said there, and you apply it to New Age Meats' capital raise journey. Again, first raising about $5 million in a seed round, and then another $20 million in a Series A round. One of the things whenever we work with startups on their fundraising pitch at Startup Hypeman, is we talk about the importance of vision, particularly with investors. I want to know from your perspective, how much do you see vision playing a role when talking with investors, particularly when you balance out the idea of big picture vision versus the granular details of the product?
Venture capitalists, they are concerned about the short term, but they're also generally very long-term investors. So you definitely have to sell that long-term vision about how are we going to be the next, whatever number billion, $10 billion company. And you need to be talking that really from day one, but it gets more crystallized as you move forward. So, as you evolve your pitch from here's an idea and I need some money to just get this slightly off the ground to the next stage to, here's our entire plan and all the things we're going to do, that vision will alter as well. And you need to keep kind of honing in as you get more focused through your life cycle.
So that said, if we break this conversation down by investing rounds, and let's start with the seed round,
mm-hmm.
Is it wise then for a founder to, let me frame that a different way. Does a founder need to know what their vision is, or is it more important that they can explain what the product is and be able to say, and there is a bigger picture vision that we're working on?
And so we're talking about really seed stage at this point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to clarify there. I mean, you need both, but it's obviously these things evolve, right? So, whether you're making electric cars or cultivated meat, you have to sort of have all that market analysis of here's the things we can make. Here's what that market looks like. Here's what those consumers look like. That's an addressable market. We can get X% of it and really kind of be selling those business ideas. But, what you're looking for really at seed is a quality proof of concept to show we can do this to some degree, but I don't have everything figured out. That's why the seed stage capital is here. I think in all this though, each round investors are looking for a de-risking, and that's what we're trying to sell to them. We know what we're doing. We have all this today. Here's what we can do in the future. And here's our plan to get there. And, say that kind of whole story with confidence as you grow.
And that actually creates two follow-up questions for on my end. The first one is you mentioned the idea of de-risking the investment there, which I think it's probably like the number one thing, right? You have to be able to position this in a way that says everything as an investor, everything you do is risky. This is in the bottom 5 of risky things you could do, or the top 5 of least risky things you could do. So when you're just at that essentially idea, you definitely don't have revenue yet. Maybe there's some kind of traction, but it's not revenue. What does it take to sell the idea and kind of be like, promise me this is going to work?
Yeah. I mean, you have to show your capabilities as best you can. So that's saying things like, here's our amazing team that we've assembled and they're all on board for these particular roles. Maybe you don't have that team in place, but what you can say is we have these people targeted and we know we're going to have to hire, CXO, whatever that role is. So, as much as you can really show the plan and in that phase, really make it seem like all we have to do is add your check and we're done here. That's the way you sell the de-risking part.
All you need to do is add your check and we're done here. Okay. So then I think that's probably going to answer this next question, but I want to hear your specific take on it, which is how important is conveying, and it's a little bit of a repeat of what I've asked before, but I just want to continue to harp on this and hear your perspective. Conveying market opportunity and the landscape that's out there and balancing that against here's how the product works from step A to step Z.
It varies by stage, certainly. But the more you can show,
let's say seed stage for now.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So you're probably going to be able to show one product, and it's, that's your proof of concept at that stage. And ideally that's going to be a product that'll speak to, audiences and show a scalability. So, I think in our world, for instance, like we thought, and Brian thought, and I wholeheartedly agree, that going with a broad distribution animal is a better way to approach the market in a pork than something that's extremely niche, like, specialty animal or a fish that's, very expensive or something like that. So, part of that is matching those things, and investors do notice that. So, if your market opportunity is relatively small and it's a great product, it can be challenging to sell that. But I think what you also want to show is this is the product today. Here's a bunch of other products that we can make later and in that same vein. So, if you're making an electric car and you're like, here's my SUV now, but we can make motorcycles and, sedans and, all this other stuff as we expand our brand. That's definitely appealing to someone who's definitely taking that long-term view and not investing in just that first SUV.
So then specifically in your case, in the seed round with New Age Meats, at that point, the proof of concept product was alternative pork based product, right? Like a pork sausage. Are you saying then, or just to confirm, you're saying that even though the base product was pork, alternative pork, you're still positioning New Age Meats as a alternative or sustainable meat company as opposed to a alternative or sustainable pork company? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our entire mantra is we make meat without slaughter. How you get there, I think as technologies change, we want to make the best products at the best prices that scale. So, right now we have a certain focus, but that's always open to evolution if we can find better technology. So that's really important. I want everyone listening to maybe even like rewind and listen to that part back, because if you are raising your first round of capital, I think it's what we're hearing here is that it's important to be able to position yourself as bigger than just the go-to-market product that you're creating. Because I think you'll agree, Brian, excuse me. You'll agree, Darren. Sorry. I got my founders confused. I think you'll agree, Darren, that what they're buying into is your vision. They're not buying into your MVP. They're buying into the way you say you're going to be changing the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other side of that can't be underplayed is it's a very complicated business, very cross-functional, a lot of different verticals and specialties merging in on that. So you have to be able to speak to all those things across the board to show that you have that ability to be successful down the line. So
that said, and still thinking about the seed round here, how do you, what are some like levers you pull to be able to speak to success potential then without having revenue to speak to? And I get, we could talk about here's where the industry here's my big picture vision in a kind of like a qualitative sense, but like, are you even trying to talk any kind of numbers at that point, or anything that's more like tactical or tangible?
I mean, it certainly depends on what you're able to do at that time. So, with just an MVP, maybe you can't really get a major brand to sign up to serve your products, but could potentially get interest from, say, a strategic investor that wants to have a chip on the table. And that alone, there's some different ways to show traction. So interest from someone who can take you much further once you've actually become established is its own sort of credibility, as an example.
Is there any risk of almost like potentially name dropping and then they go and talk to that person and then, I guess, that can be its own dance, right? Like how do you know when it's right to use someone's name or potential logo to say like this could happen versus that maybe backfiring on you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Theranos would have some things to say about that in using some logos poorly. So I would certainly say you should make sure that someone can call those people, whether it's through you or not. And this is a reputation business. So I certainly, and part of our company values even integrity above all. It's extremely important to be honest about what you're actually doing.
I want to advance this discussion into the Series A stage now. Before I do that, I want to just take a step back for our listeners and ask a question. How many of you hate Google Analytics? I bet quite a few of you are probably raising your hands right now. I know I am on my side, because understanding where and why I lose site visitors before they convert is hard. So with GA, there's always some integration issue, or I got to sort through a mountain of data just to figure out what's causing leads to drop off. It's not fun. That's why I was excited to learn of a better way to measure website analytics, and that's Oribi. Oribi is a unique marketing analytics tool that captures all the events visitors perform on your website. Here's the best part, without using code. So Oribi enables you to analyze visitor behavior patterns, build smart funnels, and get tons of insights so you always know what your next step is. And that means finally, you can understand your visitors and know what to change in order to convert more, which means no more blind spots. Again, all that stuff without having to know any sort of code. You can just launch it on your site with a couple clicks. To start your free trial, visit oribi.io/today. That's oribi.io/today. We've got them linked in the show notes as well. And use the coupon code Hypeman for 20% off any plan. That's all one word, Hypeman. Use that code for 20% off any plan and get your free trial going at oribi.io/today. And today on Startup Hypeman, the podcast, we are with Derin Alemli, the COO of New Age Meats, talking about their journey of landing investors and raising capital without having any revenue. And to date, they've raised $25 million in total across 2 separate rounds. So let's talk about that second round, the $20 million Series A. I know I was pumped when I got that email saying and saw the TechCrunch article that you raised $20 million. As you advanced into that Series A coming out of the seed round, I want to know, at least from like a getting connected to investors perspective, are you at that point meeting every investor through introductions from the existing investment team from the seed round? Or are you still actively reaching out or trying to get introductions through other parties to investors?
Yeah, totally. I do want to correct one thing. We have raised actually 32 million to date. It was 3 million in a seed round, 4 million in a seed extension that we did over 2020, and then 25 million for the Series A. But just wanted to make sure that was on the record.
Yeah, my mistake. Sorry, 32 million over, which is even better.
Look, you're meeting investors every way you can. I think there's certainly the evolution of investors is also something that I think is really important as you move through these stages. At this, talking to smaller venture capitals, angel investors, there's a lot of sort of mission capital out there for these types of things. And those are great signals. But as you move to bigger and bigger check sizes, the swimming pool can write those checks changes basically each round. So you can leverage your seed investor. Whatever you can do to get those intros of what you see as target companies is important. And the other thing is that VCs have very different criteria for what they look for in investments. When we were talking to investors there, we qualified pretty instantly. Do you invest in pre-revenue companies? And a lot of them just say no. And some of that shifting certainly, but that's something that you can definitely be efficient on in your time. to just be out there and get introduced to as many investors as possible. Because that's really what it is. It's an odds game. You're going to talk to hundreds of investors and get, 10 yeses, if not, several hundred investors to get that same 10. So it's really about pounding pavement, using as much pounding digital payment, at least using as much of your network as you can to get those introductions to start having the conversations that eventually lead to investment.
So in this round, then the Series A, what are one or two specific ways the pitch evolves at this point, as opposed to how you would pitch it at the seed round?
I think it's that clarity of the vision is getting a lot more focused, and you're going to have to be a lot more specific about your plans. It's here's your money and use of funds. It's not a casual, well, some of that's going to payroll, a little on rent. It's very detailed projections, a very involved, especially if you're a deep tech company like ours that is, some deep tech and some CPG and everything in between. You need to have a pretty extensive data room that shows all the things you're doing across the board. Whereas that data room may or may not be nearly as extensive at Series C.
Perhaps this goes back to making sure you're in front of the right investors in the first place. But I would say at least most software companies at Series A round are like, they've got revenue to their name and maybe even, a couple $1 million in annual revenue at that point. You were still in R&D mode, but was the understanding up front that you were only meeting with investors who even who know that from the beginning that, hey, this is going to be a long build to get there?
Yeah, certainly something that we qualified. But I think also once you're getting there, you should have some potential customers that are lined up for when you're there. I think a great salient example in the market right now is Rivian in a public market. They have pre-sold some, I think 20,000 cars, don't quote me on the exact number, to Amazon. That's certainly much further down the pike, but I'm sure that as they were raising rounds, they had an indication of interest from Amazon several rounds before that helped them bridge to that space.
So essentially, you cannot just, even if there's no revenue yet, you've got to be able to show progress in other ways, whether it's letters of intent or completion of a delivery model, things like that nature. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that'll vary a lot by business. For us, it's, hey, who's a potential food customer in whatever sort of capacity that actually worked out for us, and align that traction in however you can. And, as contractual as you can get at your current stage, which is probably going to be limited at that point. But, you want the demonstration of that interest for sure.
What's the balance between, because there are some investors, you could probably make the argument that many investors want to also give advice along the way on how you should do things, right? What's the balance between being committed to your way of doing things versus being open and flexible to the way they say, oh, you should go this distribution path, or I want you to use these people, that kind of stuff?
I love this question because that is a thing you have in every one of these conversations. And if you ask 10 VCs, you're going to get 15 opinions. So you're certainly from all over the place. I think it's extremely important to take that in, but you're going to get conflicting feedback. And so it's your job as a leader and an entrepreneur to filter that feedback in a way that applies to your business, and be polite about whatever those notes are. And certainly that is challenging at times, but that's also just part of being good at investor relations.
Sure. So yeah, it's essentially playing the relationship game at the same time. That's a great suggestion. Here's where we're focused, or that's a great suggestion.
Right.
We'll take that into account as we enact this strat, the stuff like that. Yeah, totally.
And it's investor relations it's in the name, but it's a relationship business. You need to develop those connections and get them to understand you and to believe in you. And that is not necessarily that's not going to come out in just the first conversation.
How about then answering questions from investors at the Series A stage? What kinds of questions are you getting at that point versus what you might get at the seed stage?
It's going to be pretty detailed. The diligence was extensive for every every company that, there's a gating function that kind of happens with it. So there's first pitch, there's depending on the investment committee, and then they're trying to write a memo, and they're going to look through it and may have follow-up questions. So when they do have follow-up questions, they are going to be detailed. And you're going to need to spend some time and budget that time to be able to get back to them and prepare your team as well that, hey, I don't know what questions are coming. For our team especially, it's like, this could be on the biological side, it could be on food production, it could be on food safety, it could be on your marketing plan. All that stuff has to work together. And when you're in that raise mode, the team definitely needs to be very, very up to speed on, I'm going to be coming to you with questions and I don't know what they're going to be about, and we're going to need to turn them around pretty quick.
In the live meeting, whether it's a first meeting or a second meeting, if you don't have the answer offhand, if you can't, if either you haven't thought of it yet, or if you can't, essentially freestyle a response, what is the proper way to say, I'll need to get back to you?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what they're asking. If they're asking something that should be paramount, that one's a little harder. If it's something that's definitely a deeper dive, I think it's the just general move is, don't have that information in front of me right now. We can definitely get it. I've made a note and I'll follow up with you here shortly.
And that's like, there's an understanding then that like, that's okay. And they're not like, wow, this person's not prepared.
Generally, yeah. And again, it just depends. If you're asking, if you're asking sort of basics of like, what's the product or something like that, and they don't have no idea, that's just a lack of preparation. But if they're asking you, some very deep scientific question in our case, there's some stuff that, I'm not a biologist by trade, so I'm going to need to get back to you on that, and that's fine.
What's your take on? I don't know if the right phrase is like forcing their hand, but essentially creating almost like pressure to get in on a deal as opposed to like waiting around for, and
yeah,
kind of like being beholden to their timeline.
You're trying to get everyone to move at the same pace so that you can get them all there and have a competitive round at the end, but that doesn't always work like that. And I do again think, there's an integrity factor. I have heard of folks trying to play that game and kind of falling on their face, and they sort of lose those investors potentially, because they weren't able to actually back that up, which then kind of goes to, are they really serious? Do they know what they're doing? All that sort of stuff. So it's certainly a strategy. I do think though that there is a gambit and a risk reward payoff to how real your actual other offers are.
Mm-hmm. So it is a hedge your bets wisely sort of scenario.
Yes, very much so.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that there was, it is a numbers game, right? You got to reach out to a lot of people to get a certain amount of meetings to get an even smaller number of yeses. Are you using any software to keep track of that? Are you just opening up a Google sheet? How are you keeping track of your own investor outreach conversations and potential funding timelines?
That's another thing that I do think evolves. So spreadsheets are fine earlier on, but as you get into multiple deal flows, different kinds of complications or investor sizes, and you want to quantify things a little bit more, I do think moving to a CRM is useful. It is a sales function. So using a HubSpot or a Salesforce or something like that can definitely be advantageous, but those are also not cheap. So it's something that a seed stage company probably doesn't have access to. But as you move further along, it's a worthwhile investment.
And actually, I would say if anyone's looking for a software recommendation and they need one that would cost less, I recommend using Pipedrive because the annual cost of it's not that much. And even at the seed stage, if you can throw out, I don't know, $400 for the year, which is what I think it costs for one seat, something to that effect. It's better to just get yourself off of spreadsheets as soon as possible and have like automatic reminders set up. And even though I personally have not raised money for this business, I can't tell you the number of times I think back to like the first 2 years of running my company and being like, why was I using spreadsheets for that long when I could have probably like short circuited progress by like 6 to 8 months if I just got on top of some of these processes better.
Yeah, entirely. And that's the thing is it gets out of control quickly. So the sooner you can spend the upfront time on organization, and this, I mean, honestly, this is true of so many things in business. It is something where organization matters. Putting in the time up front pays off a lot in the back end.
I got one more question here before we head to our wrap up. One of the questions I frequently get is how much, a founder will say, how much money should I ask for? And obviously it's going to vary based on business and round and things like that. I'll tell you this, my response is always, well, I'm not an expert in the financial side of things, but raise more than you think you'll need because you need to build in some I screwed up money in there. Like not everything's going to go perfectly. But what's your opinion and how should that number be determined for what the actual amount should be? Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of people who are like, they're afraid to say, they'll say to themselves, we want to raise, I don't know, 1.5 million. And I'll be like, well, you should ask for 2. And they're like, ooh, can we do that? Right. So can you talk through like the psychology of figuring all that stuff out?
There's a lot of schools of thoughts on this. I think that there's certainly a reasonable number for any given business where if you don't come in at that or more, people in the know are going to say there's no way they can do that for that. So you do have to have at least some educated guess at like what a minimum is. And certainly some businesses are better off not trying to raise larger rounds. I don't think I'm certainly not one of those. And I think if you're listening to this thinking that you want to make one of these big capital intensive companies, you're probably going to need a lot more money than you think. But I think the school of thought is essentially there's 2 ways to go about it. It's go for a lower number and hope to get higher with some sort of competition, or go for some higher number and just see how much you can get. I would say I think the former tends to have, if you think of like the optionality around it, tends to have some more upside with less downside risk. But I've heard of companies kind of succeeding at both.
Okay. Now, as you mentioned, in your case, we're going to go for a lot of money, but also I think you have a capital intensive business model that takes a lot of money to like just do some of these core functions to get the product to market. So
and I think we always presented it as like we'd like a certain amount, but more always gets you more. So more money just helps us to move faster and more efficiently and add the breadth that we need in such a complicated cross-functional business.
And actually, so let me ask one more question before we hit our wrap up. Have you ever been in a situation where the money that an investment group says they'll give is contingent on something like, yes, we'll fund this, but you need to hire this specific person who we know and trust, things like that?
I haven't personally, but I have heard of some other friends who have. I mean, as with anything, if there's strings attached, you just got to understand what's it attached to. So are you getting in bed with someone that you think can be, accretive to what your overall business is looking like? Or is it something where, they have a lot going on that maybe you don't want to get committed to them? And that's just a case by case basis, depending on what's on the table.
Let's begin our wrap up. First off, Derin, where can our listeners find you and where can they learn more about New Age Meets?
So certainly you can, my main channel is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn /D Alemli is where you can find me. New Age Meets is on multiple handles. So I believe we are on New Age Meets Co on Instagram, and then New Age Meets on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Who is one person who you want to shout out?
I mean, I gotta say, big shout out to our newest VP of marketing who started last year, Kati Karaki. She's doing a bang up job and, helping me be better at telling our story as well.
Great.
And I apologize. That is New Age Meets Co on Facebook.
New Age Meets Co. We'll now each give our top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on our discussion today. I'll go first and I'll toss it over to you. The topic today was landing investors with no revenue. I think one of my big takeaways from this, and it came towards the end of our conversation, but as it pertains to figuring out how much money you should ask for. Don't fall victim to asking for too little, because you might create the impression on the other side of investors saying, well, there's no way you can accomplish what you say you're going to accomplish with only that much money. So understand your audience's perspective as you think of how much you should ask for. Derin, top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners?
Investor capital raising is a relationship business. So the more people you can know early in the cycle, the better off that's going to pay off for you in the end. Always be selling and always be looking for those introductions.
My final question, which is how we end every episode of this show, fill in the blank, Derin. Entrepreneurship is blank.
Entrepreneurship is complicated and hard, but incredibly rewarding.
Say a little bit more on that.
I mean, there's a lot going on. And I think anyone who says they know everything that they're doing is really just not quite being honest with themselves. So I, like anyone in startups, am not a finished product, and there's always more to learn. And you just have to keep your mind open and understand that there is more that you can do. You're going to need other people involved, especially as you scale. But the reward is, you can really change people's lives, whether, you are in a mission-driven startup like this, or, you're really just building a team and paying a lot more people than you ever thought you would. And, supporting their lives, which is rewarding into itself.
He is Derin Alemli, COO of New Age Meats. Derin, thank you so much for joining today on Startup Hypeman, the podcast.
Thanks, Raj.
That does it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and leave a rating and review in your podcast app, or do us one better. Hit the share button. Send this episode to one friend who you think needs to hear it. While you're on your way out, don't forget to follow Startup Hypeman on Instagram and LinkedIn at Startup Hypeman. And remember, you can also connect with today's guest as well. They left their contact info. They love hearing if what they shared helped you in any way. StartupHypeman.com is the place to catch the full 17-season archive and learn all about how to pitch your startup. We'll see you next week, but until then, stay hyped. Raj Nation out.